Psalms 34 is where we're going to go today. In Psalms 34, actually, if I could back up a few weeks, on Wednesday night, I taught from Psalms 23, two different times. And even though I've read the Psalms many times, I never did take the time to stop and really take a close look at the passage, to study it like I do the rest of the Bible. I just kind of thought it was a book of songs, which it is. And outside of doing something for a funeral, I really never took a look at Psalms, and don't know that I ever preached a sermon out of the book of Psalms. If I did, I don't remember it. But when I went to Psalms 23 and I've seen such rich blessings and such great instructions that many times that are being overlooked as we begin to read these Psalms, we just gloss over them. For the most part, they're short chapters and they're easy to read. We might find some messages in that, some good truths that we can apply to our life that we're just missing by not stopping and slowing down and taking a look. Psalms 23 did that for me, so I kind of just played around with Psalms for a while, and then a couple weeks ago, because last week we had the service at Hope's Lake with the baptism, and so I didn't preach. So it's been a couple of weeks since I've preached. And so for about 2 weeks, I've been listening to a song from the Brooklyn Tabernacle Choir. And at the end of this, I'm going to try to leave enough time to play that. It's an 8-minute video, which we'll play about 6 minutes of it. And the song that they sing, first of all, if you're not familiar with the Brooklyn Choir, they were birthed through prayer. The church started meeting regularly to pray, corporate prayer. And one thing that birthed from that was this choir that's blessed people all over our nations, all over the world. I particularly didn't really like their music, but for whatever reason, I seen this song, it said Psalms 34, so I'm thinking about Psalms anyway. So I played that video. It's about 7-8 years old, and I was truly blessed by that song, because all they do, they're singing Psalms 34. And I believe you'll be blessed by it when we play it at the end. But before we play that, I kind of want to go over the book of Psalms. Anyway, the first 10 verses of the book of Psalms, chapter 34. I kind of want to go over that. It's kind of like 23. It's broken into 2 categories. The first category, the one we're going to cover, verses 1 through 10, speaks of David. I truly believe it's David here. And either you could title it The Testimony of David or The Praise and Thanksgiving of David in this book of Psalms, or chapter 34 of Psalms. So as we go through that, I want you to pay attention, because I'm going to read the 10 verses, and then we're going to stop and we're going to go back. Now, if we were here on Wednesday night, I'd have my little chart, my little pad up here where I could take a look at, kind of remind me of where I want to go, and some points that I don't want to miss that maybe I need to start doing on Sunday, because sometimes when I go over my message again afterwards, I realize, man, I missed this important part that I wanted to get out. So I'm going to hopefully that we won't do that, simply because this chapter is so amazing. I told him in the first service with VBS, Kelsey keeps asking us to get one of those boots. I think you're supposed to color it. First of all, I don't color. I don't think most men don't color. So I don't color. And I sure don't color it pink, but they want you to put your most favorite Bible verse on it. Well, we don't have enough room in this church for me to do that, simply because my favorite Bible verse is the verse that I'm teaching any given week. So my favorite verse, my favorite chapter day is Psalms 34. So if I were to do that, then the cleanup crew would have a problem when it come time to clean everything up. Awesome chapter. Awesome chapter. It's filled with the blessings, the thanksgiving, and David looks in this chapter, and he first of all he makes a declaration or a stand first to that he's doing this, and because of the blessings of God, he realizes that this is not to be contained just for himself, but he must invite others to join in. It's a beautiful psalm. But anyway, let's go ahead and get started so maybe we can get out of here before it gets too hot. In Psalms 34, I'm reading from the Legacy Standard Bible, chapter 34, beginning at verse 1. I will bless Yahweh at all times. His praise shall continually be in my mouth. My soul will make its boast in Yahweh. The humble will hear it and rejoice. O magnify Yahweh with me, and let us exalt His name together. I inquired of Yahweh, and He answered me, and delivered me from all that I dread. They looked to Him and were radiant, and their faces will never be humiliated. This poor man called out, and Yahweh heard him and saved him out of his troubles. The angel of Yahweh encamps around those who fear Him and rescues them. O taste and see that Yahweh is good. How blessed is the man who takes refuge in Him. O fear Yahweh, you, His saints, for there is no want to those who fear Him. Verse 10. The young lions do lack and suffer hunger, but they who inquire of Yahweh shall not be in want of any good thing. And if we believe the Scriptures, and I hope that you do, then we have to believe what David, the psalmist here, is the point he's trying to get across to us here today, some 20, probably 2,800 years later, somewhere in that neighborhood. Could be wrong a few centuries or two. But we read in Psalms 34, and I want to give this little bit of an introduction. Well, you'll see why. When we read Psalms 20 or 34, it's being written, and it's to one, and we believe it's David, who has been saved from troubles. And how they were saved from troubles is that they were have tasted the goodness of God. And the reason I want to bring just that little short thing to our attention is I don't know sometimes what happens to us. And if you've been saved any time and serving God any time at all, you've walked through some difficult times. And just your being here means that God brought you out of those hard times. But somehow we forget that many times. We go through something, God in His goodness and mercy, He gets us out of it. He takes us through it, and we come through it even stronger than when we went in. And then next thing we know, maybe a year later, maybe a month later, maybe 5 years later, we've got disaster or something strike our home again. And once again, we find ourselves in the valley. We find ourselves depressed. We find ourselves just really not knowing what to do. And David is reminding us that we're saved from our troubles because we remember the goodness of God. Somewhere in your memory bank that you need to start doing is when God really comes to your rescue, and I believe He does quite often. Many times we don't even realize it, but when we are very aware of how God has come to our rescue, we need to grab a hold of that. And I like to do like I watch The Mentalist all the time. I don't know if you've ever watched that, but but kind of like psych, that he's a mentalist. He's not a psych. He's a mentalist. Well, he talks about his castle, memory castle. And he takes things and he grabs it and he puts it somewhere in that castle so that he can always remember where it's at. So anytime he's ever seen something, he always can remember it because he places this somewhere in his memory castle, he calls it. Well, I'm asking you to do the same thing. When you can remember when God really delivered you from something, the goodness of God was just so evident in your life, grab that, put it somewhere, because I promise you, you're going to need it. You're going to need it somewhere in your walk with God, and it is going to be to your benefit and even the benefit of your family if you can reach and grab that and say, I remember the goodness of God. And guess what? You may find yourself a little depressed and down and out, but once you begin to think about the goodness of God, you'll quickly begin to come out of this. So, as we begin to talk, I want you to just remember this and listen. I would love to think I could get up here and preach a sermon and it's just going to illuminate everything about this passage that you need to learn. That's just not going to happen. I've been blessed tremendously by this passage. I can't even describe it in words. But I've been blessed by this passage because I stepped back, I slowed down, I began to look at it. I done due diligence. I wanted to try my best to get everything out of this passage I could possibly get. And wow, what a ride it's been with the Lord in reading this. And I ask that you do the very same thing. So if we get started right out of the gate in verse number 1 and the first part of verse number 2, the Psalms opens with a jubilant praise. I just love it when no matter, listen, maybe I should have said something in the introduction, because David, it doesn't say what David was going through, but we can kind of have an idea. And David has probably more likely found himself in some places he shouldn't have been, found himself on some sides that he shouldn't have been, in trouble where maybe he shouldn't have been. But anyway, he's found himself in trouble, but all of a sudden, out of the gate, verse 1, chapter 34, this psalm opens with a jubilant praise. And I'm not talking about some manufactured praise. And if you've come up in the Pentecostal world, and listen, I'm not kicking Pentecostal folks. I love Pentecostal folks. I was raised Pentecostal. I'm not kicking that at all. But I do know that one of the things they like to do, they like to get you into a frame of mind to where if you're part of a worship, some music, and I've actually went and listened to some this week, just as a reminder, and they even start the music, and the entire process, they're building you up to get you to a point to where they can get you to have some type of an emotional response. Now, we're emotional beings. I'm not kicking it. I'm not saying that. What I am saying is I shouldn't need a worship leader, or I shouldn't need a pastor to try to direct and lead me to some type of an emotional response. On this, there is no coaching going on here. Right out of the gate, there is this passage opens up with a jubilant praise. Now, in the Pentecostal world, that response has to look something spectacular. I mean, you've got to either run an aisle, or you need to jump on a pew, or you need to do something. I know I've seen it all, been there, participated in a lot of it. So, and again, I'm not kicking any of that. All I'm saying is we don't want to have to manufacture something to offer praise and worship to God. And by the way, this song that we're going to play at the end, the people will get a little bit emotional, and that's okay. But they're not being hyped to that emotion. The song, and I believe truly why the people are really beginning to feel the praise and worship is because the song is Psalms 34. They're repeating Psalms 34 throughout this song. And it's just a wonderful song. And you will see before we finish. But right out of the gate, like I said, I will exalt or extol the Lord at all times. Now I have to stop just for a moment, because if you even want to take and you're this person that likes to really look these words up in the Hebrew, this at all times, the writer is saying here that no matter what happens, or no matter what is happening, that is a valid statement to make, and that will go right along with what the writer is trying to come across, that no matter. Let's take a disaster. Now listen, I'm not saying that this disaster in Florida with these kids, and I don't know, I've heard as high as 28 kids have been missing, and it was a girls' event, like I don't know if it's a girls' camp. I'm not saying that we have to joy in what happens. No, we hate what happens, but we can joy in what we know the Lord can do. And it'll make a little more sense, hopefully, when I get finished. And just in case I miss it or you miss it, it's because in this psalm, David asked the Lord, and the Lord answers him. So we realize that even in a tragedy, that our best bet is to exalt the Lord at all times, in all situations, no matter what. We are to exalt Him. And He says we will bless the Lord forever. And he goes in and he says, my soul will boast in the Lord. Now, not in any other. I don't want to spend much time here, and I know most of you know that I do like Donald Trump. I voted for Donald Trump, and I would vote for him again. But Donald Trump is Donald Trump. He's a flawed individual, just like the rest of us. But many times these Christians, the way they act, Donald Trump he just hasn't. He can do no wrong. You've got one group over here that hates everything he does. You've got another group that thinks everything he does is right. I'm telling you, he gets some things wrong, but he gets some things right. David is saying, I will not boast in a man or a person, but I will boast in the Lord. Now, the church is having a problem with this. Now, I know we don't do it here. Because that would mean you would be boasting in myself. I know we're not doing it here, but I will tell you, and I preached a sermon on this a few years ago, because it's become evident, and it was not only evident several years ago, but it's even more today, that the messenger has become more important than the message. That the church is more concerned with the person delivering the message than the message itself. Shame on us. It can't be that way. I know some of these mega churches that the pastor will be preaching in one area and a virtual image of him is there at a different church because they want to see that man there. Folks, we cannot allow that. We can't allow that to happen on any level. We must be worshiping God. The message must always be greater than the messenger. It has to be. It has to be. There's no two ways around that. So we need to make sure that we will boast in the Lord, not boast in another man. That God and God alone will be the only one that will receive our glory. Then he goes on and says, and let the afflicted hear and rejoice. So I began to look at that word afflicted. And immediately when I looked at it, my mind goes back to the Matthew, the Sermon on the Mount, Beatitudes, where Jesus kindly touches this, because that word afflicted talks about the humble, the humility. Let the humble praise the Lord. Let the afflicted hear and rejoice. Let the humble hear and rejoice. Because for whatever reason, I guess maybe the proud, whether they don't hear or whatever, but David is making a point here, and even Christ made it in Beatitudes, let the humble hear and rejoice. Those that are afflicted, the psalmist says, they can gain hope, but not only hope, and I really like the Hebrew brought this out, a significant hope, a great hope. And today, if we're not careful, we've lost that hope, and all we need to do is start just diving back into the Word of God. I mean, maybe somehow or another our faith has been shaken a little. We're going to talk a little bit about faith in a few moments, and there's nothing that will shore up your faith than having that type of relationship with God, knowing for a fact He's going to help you out. Verse 3 says, glorify the Lord with me. So there's something going on here. First of all, if you look the root word here, meaning to be great, I make it a point here to say this, simply because my world that I grew up in, and I may have got it wrong, because not everyone thinks like I do, and you can thank God for that. But it's kind of like when we were encouraged to worship and praise God, to the point where you almost felt guilty if you didn't meet a certain criteria of what true worship would actually look like. And I was always kind of thinking, well, maybe this is because by adding that type of worship to the God, that you're in some weird way adding to His glory. But you're not. Whether you praise God or not, you don't add to His glory, and you do not take away from His glory. Whether things are good or tragedy happens, it doesn't make God's glory stronger, or it doesn't make it lesser. This tragedy that happened in Texas does not make God a lesser God, even though some people are thinking it does, by beginning to question and asking, where's your God now, and these types of things. No, David says, glorify the Lord with me. And when David is talking about this, David, and I may cover this again in a moment. Well, right in that same verse, he said, let us exalt His name together. And he puts that together, but David here is making a point, because he's first going to, before he really starts praising God, he's going to make a point that he has to do this himself individually, and then he brings some in and corporately and brings this out. So I began to read from John Henry Jowett. I don't know if you've ever heard of John Henry Jowett, but he was a Protestant preacher out of the UK around the turn of the 19th century, or I believe maybe the 20th century, and I think he died in 1923 anyway. But he made a great statement, and I want to read that statement from him that he commented on this passage in and of itself. He says, praise that lifts its voice in solitude is beautiful. In other words, he's saying praise that I give on my own to the Lord is beautiful, and it is. He said, but it is far more beautiful beautiful when heard in communion with the praise of one's fellows. God's praises sound best in concert. He absolutely nailed it. If you've ever been in a huge event, and I've been in a few of them, and when it comes to the time of praise and worship, and I began to notice that some of the, you know how it goes, you'll have your worship leader up there singing, and then all of a sudden maybe they quit singing and the music stops, and the audience of 5, 6, 7,000, whatever group is there, begins to sing. Well, I kind of backed out so I could get more of a bird's eye view and really began to hear that praise and worship echoing through this building. Man, it's beautiful. That worship leader could sing. Oh, and those musicians could play. It's just like our worship leader here and our musicians here. They do such a great job, but I'm going to tell you, when they just stopped and the music stopped, I'm telling you, what I heard, and this just happened to be all men. And I'm going to tell you guys, nothing against women, but there is something about hearing 5,000, 6,000 men sing. This was the most awesome thing that I'd ever heard. And boy, did John Henry Jowett, did he nailed this. Folks, I know we can do we don't have to come to church. I mean, I would wonder why we wouldn't come. Church is not going to put you in heaven. We don't have to come to prayer, to corporate prayer. We can do it on our own. But the beauty of coming together is unmatched. It's absolutely unmatched. And David is trying to get that point across to us here. Because David will. He will make the point. I'm staking my claim. I'm doing it myself. But then he realizes, I've got to get some people to join with me. Whether you agree or not is really irrelevant. That's exactly what the psalmist is saying to us. So it doesn't matter if we like it or not. What matters is what the psalmist is saying here in the Word of God. And when we get to verse number 4, here is why sometimes it's really good to look into the original language, here being the Hebrew. In 6 Hebrew words, the psalmist is saying something that we have to explain in several words. And David does his best, or the translators do their very best, in getting that to us. And actually, we can even find some deeper things. But in 6 Hebrew words, the English coming out of that is, I sought the Lord, and He answered me, and He delivered me from my fears. In context, we see the verb here, seek, means to ask or inquire. Now, the reason I want to make this point, because I'm reading from the Old Testament, and you know this, but sometimes we need to be reminded. If we look in the Old Testament, even with David, even with King Saul, several of the different folks, because we see this word seek, and it means ask or acquire. In the Old Testament, it was very common. We'll take King Saul, for example. If Saul, instead of going to the Lord himself, he would go to Samuel. That David, instead of going to the Lord himself, many times he would go to Nathan or Nathaniel. This was a kind of a common practice, but here, that's not what's going on. David is going to the Lord himself. I don't know, maybe someone that's much smarter than I am can help me in this area. I don't know if David could look out into the future and see the day that Christ would be on the cross, And that when he would come off the cross, and how we were told that the veil that separated the holies of holies from the rest of the temple, how that veil was rent, was torn in two, and now that given you and I, the normal common folk people, given us access into the very presence of God. I don't know if David's seen that into the future, whatever the case may be. David now didn't use Nathan to inquire of the Lord. David inquired of the Lord himself. And the Scripture is very clear, makes it clear that he did, because he said, I inquired of the Lord. And how we know he did? Because he said, and the Lord answered me. The Lord answered me. So David, David counts himself part of the afflicted, the humble. And he said, the Lord heard and he answered me. Folks, you know, I know that doesn't stir response in us today, and I get it. We're human. We're in the flesh and blood. We respond to things that are tangible, things that we can see, and it can move on us. It's not the invisible world. A lot of times it doesn't motivate us that way, but there's a day coming it will. There's a day coming when we meet Christ Jesus face to face that we're going to have to step back and think, I can't believe that this man, that God himself, and all his sovereignty and all his power, all his wisdom, all of who he is, great as he is, he not only stopped to listen, to hear my prayer, but he answered me. That I shouldn't even be allowed in his presence. I even believe when we get to heaven that we're still going to have that awe and that of who he is, how grateful we are just to even be in the presence of God. It will. It may not mean anything now, today, but it will. In verse 6, David said, this poor man, identifying himself as one of the afflicted, he said, the Lord heard him. And before seeking the commitment of others, before asking others to join, David made a purpose in his life that he's going to make a stand. He's going to make a stand that he's going to do this himself. Guys, I do this every week. Anybody that ever teaches, you may not realize you're doing this, but before you get up and teach, you've already, or I hope you have, you've made a declaration that I'm going to do my very best to put into practice the very thing that I'm going to ask you to do. And this is what David is doing here. This is what the psalmist is telling us. He said, because I'm getting ready to ask some folks to join. Why? Because this is such a good thing. I've got to ask him. And like I said at the beginning, he's going to do this because God had saved him from all of his troubles. Maybe we may not know his difficulties, but we know that he said that the God saved him from his troubles. But actually, I began to look at this word troubles, and I'm going to try to hurry through this stuff. Troubles is probably not the best word, because sometimes we use our English words and they don't have really the punch that some of these, they don't have the punch that they used to have. We kind of maybe soften things up. So what's happening is David is saying that the Lord not only heard but delivered me from my troubles. We could actually say the Lord delivered me from my fears. And I'm going to tell you, and for that we ought to thank God, because the Bible tells us for sure, Job even tells us, that days are few and full of what? Now, come on, guys. Somebody's got to answer me. Because, Ann, I couldn't hear you. I just heard your mouth move. We're full of trouble. So we're told, Peter says, even Peter says, why are you even surprised that you're having all of these troubles? So we're going to have the troubles. So that's not what David is saying here. He's not saying that you're going to have a life free of troubles. He said, but what you can have is the Lord will answer you and deliver you from your fears. That's a greater word than troubles. Actually, trouble or fears, if you look at it, and I revert back to Dave Wilkerson on the sermon he preached several years ago about a call to anguish, and I've showed the little 6-minute video here before. That David Wilkerson says, the anguish that we should have should be something that would drive us to our knees, but it's not an anguish that should always be on top of us. Simply because, yes, we need to have that type of thing that would drive us to our knees. And he used the excuse of being a Sunday school teacher, and he asked the question, where are the Sunday school teachers that are falling on their face before God, crying out for these kids that are in their class that they know that are not going to heaven? Where is the anguish for that? And I'm going to tell you, and you could feel that heavy burden that was on David Wilkerson as he was preaching this. And I'm telling you, once we have an understanding of Psalms 34, that anguish can drive us to our knees on behalf of praying that God would help us and help our family and help our people. But I'm here to tell you, because of what David has said, because of God's goodness and His mercy, that anguish can be lifted up off us, knowing that God has heard our prayers and He will answer our prayers. We can delight and rejoice that God He's once showed us His goodness. He will shower His goodness on us again, and He will help us in this situation. That way, folks, if we couldn't, how are parents going to get by? How do you live as parents if your kids are not serving God? I would be a basket case if God couldn't, if the Lord couldn't help me, and knowing that He hears that prayer and that He will do everything short of making people, but He will plant obstacles in people's lives that will drive them back to Him. See, this is what David is saying, that He will relieve us of our fears. And guys, we are a people that look for security in a very in a very insecure world. We have disappointments. We have rejection. We have family issues. We have family breakups. We lose jobs. We have sickness. We have death in our family. We have all of these things that bring all this disappointment. We're looking for security. We're burdens on every hand. Maybe I just left it at that. But because we know God, because David knew the Lord, when there was only one way to look, and that was up, David found security in God, knowing that God could not be shaken. We can be shaken, and we are shaken. And this is why when we're shaken, it should be just for a temporary time, because somewhere we've got to get outside of ourselves and start looking at God, the one that cannot be shaken. And because of His steadfastness, because of His love, because of His goodness, we now can find that stability once again, not in and of ourselves, but because we have now taken refuge in Him. I remember the story in 2 Kings chapter 6, when you have Elisha there, His servant went out and he seen all the enemy encamped all around them, and he got very worried and very scared, and he went in and got his master, and he said, "Master, come and look." And his master went out and looked, and all of his master could see, he said, "Listen," and I'm paraphrasing now, "you don't see what I see, because what I see is those that are for us outnumber those that are against us." Folks, sometimes we've got to learn how to put our spiritual eyes in and have a little faith that the world may look like it's falling apart, but those that are for us way outnumber those that are against us. All of this will start making us have a different outlook on life and have an understanding. Yet things may look grim, things may not look good, but God's in control, and He can turn these things around immediately. And if He doesn't pull us out of the storm, which most of the time He does not, He will somehow or another lift us up above the storm, so we're not as affected by the storm as we was before we went to Him. But here is the catch. All that I said is good, and it's true. But there's a catch. The catch is found in verses 8 and 9. Taste and see that He is good. In other words, that requires something from us. Just like a child learning to walk, taking them first steps, we have to step. Folks, I am not a fan of believing we can just sit down and the Lord's just going to drop everything in our lap. I believe that if we're struggling in these areas, I believe we have to get up and make that move toward God. And once we do, then that's what the psalmist is talking about. Taste and see that the Lord is good. And I've just got to keep going. He says, "And blessed is the man who takes refuge in Him." And it talks about fear of the Lord. So what is fear of the Lord? And I'm just going to say it with two words. Then you can really drill down in it. Right living, or living right. If we fear God, we will live right. Do our very best to live right. I'm not talking about salvation. I'm talking about those of us who are born again. The fear of God is synonymous with living right. And verse 10 sums it up. God provides for His own. Those who seek the Lord lack no good thing. One who tastes and sees, and you going forward in that direction, and we're seeking God. It is those who are actively looking to God, seeking the way of the Lord, not what seems good to me or right to me, but the way of the Lord. They are the ones who will find that He is good.